In this episode, we'll be talking about the trade-off between spending time to perfect your product and getting it launched. This is the Stretch Goals podcast, where each week we'll share insights and lessons learned based on our experiences as entrepreneurs. We'll challenge you to create ambitious goals as you start and grow your business. I'm your host, Robert Dickerson.
And I'm Scott Davis.
When I think about product perfection, at least for my own products, I think about how our products exceed customer expectations and solve their problem in a clear and simple fashion. It's a product that I'm proud to put my name on and put out there into the world. And essentially, these products are free of glaring omissions, problems that might hinder their usage or adoption. But the problem lies in the distinction between how we as founders and leaders view perfection of our products and how our customers view it. And sometimes in search of product perfection, we can continually delay launching while we're tweaking and fixing bugs. And I know this is a problem that I come across all the time, evaluating whether or not this new feature, this new bug is actually something that we should delay launching our product to fix. So in this episode, Scott and I are going to talk about some strategies that can help you push through perfection and get your product launched. So Scott, I thought about that we could start out by focusing on defining and solving your customer's problem, because I think that's really the first step in identifying whether or not you should launch your product. I know we want to talk about putting together the MVP and agile development and some of these other techniques that are really good about helping you evaluate whether or not your product is ready to launch. And I think it's important as we talk about these things is that you want to get your product out there quickly. You want to continually iterate. So talk a little bit about the iteration, the agile approach, and things that you found have worked well to help you force getting products out there, getting in front of people, even if they're not perfect.
Sure. Like you said, I mean, these are things that come up, software products, physical products, whatever. I mean, the iteration process is always ongoing in any business, right? So the question becomes, how do you know what features you ultimately want and which ones are going to be important and all of that good stuff. And from a software development standpoint, we've got the agile process, Scrum, whatever you want to call it, where you've got a backlog of issues that sort of pave your roadmap. But the problem is when you're trying to get the launch, how do you make the decisions to get to the key items that you really want to put out there in front of your customers? And that's really where a lot of people struggle. You don't necessarily know where or who your customer ultimately will be. You could put it in front of your intended target, and turns out it's not really them. It's going to be somebody else. So, from your perspective, with what you've done, how have you addressed these issues?
One thing I want to just talk about real quick is that launching doesn't necessarily mean your first release, right? It could be any release. Sometimes the first release is the hardest to get out there. And, I want to talk about that a little bit because I think as it relates to the products that I've put out there, that first release is a lot of times the hardest release.
It is.
Because you want to put your best foot forward. And so you want to make sure that the whole experience is really clean and that you've addressed any glaring problems. And sometimes, for me at least, as I'm going through the backlog of issues, it's like, oh well, all these things we gotta fix, and so it continuously delays moving the product forward. I think at some point you have to look at what you have and say, the thing that I've found that works well is to take out features that you just have to say, okay, this feature set is not going to be in this first release, and you just take it out, and so that removes a bunch of issues off the table. And so then you can take what you have and you can put it out there. And I think it's important that you don't necessarily worry about that you fixed every little problem, that you have maybe at least a solid foundation to build off of. Even if there are little issues, there's always going to be issues, especially, I think we're talking more about software development here. There's always going to be issues, but even any type of product, there's going to be problems. There's going to be things that you have to evaluate. So you have to decide whether some of these problems are big issues. If you think about Samsung with the Note, right? That battery problem was a huge issue, right? They had to, take a huge loss, and they can't sell the Note anymore. So things like that, you need to balance against maybe just a tweak or a small bug in something that maybe no one will ever see.
Yeah, here's the thing, right? Most most of the time we focus on this first impression of our software product or our new whatever product. We're so fixated on this idea that it has to be perfect at first sight, love at first sight, whatever. Throw that out the window, because here's why. 99% of the products that are launched every day are not viral day one. They just aren't. As much as we want to think that we have the greatest product in the world, that we're going to have 5 million users on day one, it's not going to happen 99.9% of the time. So if that's the case, right, why do we focus on perfection then? Let's get a product out there that proves a concept that we can get feedback from, that shows who we are, and start building the brand, start learning what our customers really need, so that we can then be perfect when we start getting that exponential growth curve, right? So I don't necessarily want to have a bad experience. I don't want a bad app review on one of my apps in the App Store. But the bottom line is, if I've got 20 users today and I've got 5 million in 2 years, those 5 million, all the reviews that they're going to be posting, is going to wash this one or two little 1 stars out for people who just don't understand what I'm trying to build. So for me, perfection doesn't need to be a day one goal. And you can ask my wife. She met me. I was sloppy the first day she met me. So, that holds true for me in daily life as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, is that, those first couple of people that use your product and give you a bad review, that doesn't necessarily mean that your product's a failure, right? And from all the products that I've launched, no one comes, right? You launch to silence, unless you have a large audience that you're launching into. Most people don't care, and they don't have time to look at it. So I think that's a really good point that you make there, is that you shouldn't really worry too much about it to start, and just focus on continuously improving each day and continuously getting things out there. And I think, you mentioned this before, is like getting the customer feedback and using that feedback to continuously improve your product.
Absolutely. And, I think as someone who I pride myself on being an early adopter of pretty much everything, maybe stupidly so, but what I like to see is, I would rather have a product that didn't meet my expectations initially, but you see how the company responds to that and tries to make that product and that relationship with you right. So, for example, like Samsung, when they found out that these batteries were dead, they didn't say anything for like weeks. So that's a bad sign right there. But if they were immediately like, yeah, you know what, send us your phone, we'll replace them for you ASAP, and then it turns out that the replacements are bad too. If they just handled it different, like, hey, we're going to give you a free, Note 6 or whatever, I don't know. But the point is, like, you can sort of learn a lot from the company. So I would rather see an app that was like, wow, this could have been really awesome, and I give it a 1 star, but I keep it on my phone, and then I see an update like maybe every week or every 2 weeks. Now I see that this company cares about what they're building, and now I'm engaged and I'm watching. I'm trying to see, like, hey, where are these guys going to take this thing? Have they fixed the bugs that were annoying me? And like, you feel a part of that process if you get in at that phase. So for me, that's kind of what I do. That's how that's how I expect as a consumer, and at the same time, that's what I do as a provider of a service and a product. I try to constantly put out new releases that fix lots of things from user feedback, but also from my own roadmap and goals for the product.
I think too, if you're solving your customer's problem, they'll overlook maybe some poor things about the product, right? Because they need it so badly to solve their problem. They're willing to overlook those warts and those bugs that might exist. And so you have time to fix those things.
Sure. And every great brand has that same problem. I mean, you look, Nike, they had their first shoe made out of a waffle iron with rubber poured into it. Surely that thing fell apart in a week or two, but they loved the shoe. So, we'll look past this. And next time you give them a shoe, it lasts 4 weeks, and then it's 6 weeks. And now we've got shoes that last 3 years. So every product goes through this, every product.
Yeah, I think about, with phones, and even Apple does this too with Apple TV, right? They launch it with a really minimal set of features, right? Yeah. And they're just continuously building on it over time. And those features work, but, they're just a very minimal set. And so that's another way to think about launching, is just launch with a core set of features that work, and then keep building on that, keep iterating on that, even if it's not perfect to start out with.
Yeah, and I don't want to get too off topic with the outline that we have for the podcast, but the thing is when you start looking at larger companies like Apple and Microsoft and Google and all these guys, like there's like this sort of bisection of the company where sometimes they have a product that they just kind of put it out there and see what happens. So like maybe Apple TV is a good example. Like they perfected the hardware for years. They spent years perfecting that hardware and then it was out of date, right? And don't get me wrong, I love my Apple TV, especially the new one. But then they just put the software out there and then they iterated it, like you said. They gave you constant updates. And every time you're like, oh man, that's a great new feature. Now I'm going to go back to it. So that's a great example of it. But on the flip side, when you start looking at like the iPhones and operating systems and things like that, these are processes that they don't cut corners on. They are so specific about perfection at launch, and they have to be, especially when you've got hundreds of millions of users on day one and stock prices and everything. So there's something that has to be. We as consumers expect perfection, but we're not mega corporations that are worth $500 million or $1 billion, right? So when we're talking about building products, we need to keep that in mind, that we don't have the time or the money to be perfect. We want to get it out there. We don't want to be an Apple or a Google who do have time in most cases to perfect their products.
That's true. They have large teams and they have time to spend a lot of money to fix some of these things. But I mean, I think there's still like a scale issue there because they still, I'm sure, have a huge backlog of things they want to fix. Absolutely. I mean, even Microsoft, if you think about Windows, I mean, there's just tons of issues there to fix. So while the scale is certainly different, I mean, I agree with you too that, for individual founders or founders with small teams, you want to think about, how you get these things out there as quick as you can. And I think it's important too, like you mentioned that, kind of these first beta testers and you like evaluating products like that. I think it's important to get people that are beta testing that have that mindset, that understand that this is an initial product and they're able to give you feedback in that light. And so they're not really maybe honing in on, really specific things or really specific features. They're kind of looking at a broad view and able to provide you that feedback that you can help bring other people on.
Absolutely. And if you get beta testers, try to get a wider array of testers because, a large demographic, because especially if you're a software developer, right? You've got people of different mindsets, like my dad's going to react to an app differently than my niece. My niece is probably just going to get it, but my dad's probably going to go, where do I click? So getting different perspectives helps you ultimately, kind of smooth out your reception of your product if you've got a good demographic covered.
Yeah, because they're going to have different expectations about how to use things. And I've always found that people will use things totally different than the way that I use them as the creator because I had a certain workflow in mind. And so I'll continuously go through that same workflow and then someone else will try it a totally different way I didn't expect.
Right.
And either find issues or be confused about the process and the workflow.
Yeah, and if you look at companies like Snapchat, when Snapchat first came out, I mean, their interface was horrendous, and in a lot of cases, it still is. But, so I downloaded Snapchat when it was like number one in the App Store years ago, and I just didn't get it. I thought it was horrible. I thought it was not well done. So they completely disconnected me. The only reason I even use Snapchat is because my friends were like, hey, come watch my Snapchat story. And I'm like, okay, But then you get used to the interface after somebody shows you how to do it or someone, or I Googled stuff, how do I do this in Snapchat? So that's an example of they defined an interface that was very specific to a very niche amount of people, younger generation who's more exploratory with their interfaces, completely alienated me, but then it went viral. So you can't hit every target, and Snapchat, in their case, they didn't care, and it worked out for them. But that's not always going to be the case for every startup and every product.
So as you're getting started and you're thinking about your own products, I think it's important to set some milestones in order to launch and figure out, what stages, what features make up certain releases. And that way you have a clear understanding of what needs to be in the product in order to launch. And then you can set deadlines around those milestones and get it out there. We've talked a little bit about, an agile approach and putting together an MVP and really iterating over those milestones and figuring out when you need to launch. And I think those milestones can change and the features within those milestones can change as you get more feedback from your customers. And that's okay, right? That's okay to move things around. It's just figuring out, okay, when I've met all these different things, I know I need to continually get the product out there. Another thing that you could do is just continuously launch on a every 2-week basis or every week basis, or maybe even more frequently in that, but just continuously push things out there. And that way you won't be limited by trying to make a decision if it's just, hey, we're going to launch, this week every day on Thursday or something like that.
Yeah, and a couple things based on what you said. Number one, I'll touch on that last thing. If you're constantly iterating when it comes to discovery of your product and search engine optimization, constantly putting releases out there is actually exceptional for this, because especially if you look like at the App Store for Google Play or iOS, every time you have a release, there's a new release that's categorized and archived and is now searchable and discoverable historically. So that helps your organic search discovery. Same thing applies to websites and other products, right? Every single time you have a new version, you've got release notes that's immediately discoverable and indexable by the search engine. So it's a slight tangent, but it gives you a little bit of context into there's added benefits to doing iterated releases. The second part, what you commented on, having a product vision and these milestones. As a certified Scrum Master, this is what we call a backlog, a product backlog. But to anybody, what this means is we need a list of features that we want in our product. And that should just come naturally, right? Every time I work on something, I'm writing notes or making mental notes on what needs to be in the product. But you need to write these down somewhere because you will forget. And these will ultimately become your roadmap as you expand on those ideas and get feedback from users and create new features. You're going to then have 3 other tasks that could sort of spawn off of that core idea. So write these things down, get a Trello board, get on Jira, pick your own tool that you love and get these tasks and items and product ideas all in one place where you can use those as your milestones, turn them into actionable things for your product that you can shoot for, and then get a team together and start building it.
So how do you tell the priority of these different things?
Yeah, great question. Great question. And that's the hardest thing, right? And that ties back to perfection of the product, right? So obviously, if you are the business, if you are the CEO or the product owner or whatever your title is, you set the priorities. But the priorities shouldn't necessarily be based on throwing darts. Sometimes they have to be, right? Because you don't know what your customers want or who your customers are. But you need to set the priorities based on feedback, based on your gut instinct, based on any number of factors. But if you've got a large bug in your software and you've got crashes that are impacting, say, more than like 3% of your user base, probably want to take a look at that and get that fixed. So that should be prioritized accordingly. Critical new features that, things that you can market that are going to get you more discoverable, hit a new demographic, things like that. Those would take precedence. But also just hitting key milestones for your company. Let's say you want to create a new revenue stream. Well, that's probably going to be high on your list. It may not be the highest, but you want to get it in there and position it right. So there's an iteration process as it pertains to setting these goals for your product, and those are outside of technical, things. This is you just setting the expectation of what your product's going to look like in 3 weeks from now, 3 months from now, 3 years from now.
Yeah, I think it's important to set that direction, that general direction that you want to go, and then, figuring out what features make sense to fix now based on, whether it's a bug or something like that you need to get fixed. And then it's just kind of this navigation of, where you're taking the product. And as you get more feedback, that path is going to change.
Absolutely. And I would suggest setting, when you create these notes initially, create what are referred to as epics in the software development space. And epic is like an overarching concept. So let's say you want to be able to pay people directly from an app you're building, okay? That would be an epic. Pay people, okay? Something generic. Now you break that down into stories. As a user, I want to be able to send money to my friend Rob. As a user, I want to be able to receive money from my friend Rob. And then you break those down into sub items. Now you have a bunch of tasks that make up those stories, and those stories make up that epic. All this technical jargon really just means set a big goal, break it down into pieces, and then break that down into some more pieces, which are actionable items that can get you to your milestones.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And I think another point I wanted to touch on is that you were mentioning continuously releasing. And I think that also shows that you're actively developing, you're actively working on the product. And I think that is a positive thing for your customers. If you see an app or you see something that's never updated, people are going to wonder, why am I going to use this, right? It's hard enough, especially with apps, to gain traction. But if you're continuously, addressing bugs, you're continuously engaging with your customers, then people are more willing, I think, to give you the time, and they understand, hey, this, they're working on it.
Absolutely, and I always give priority and have a little bit of extra appreciation for companies that do that. Two recent ones that stick out: House Party, which is a video conferencing app. It's basically like FaceTime with multiple participants. And then there's another video messaging app called Tribe. Both of those apps have done that. They've constantly incremented. They've both been very high up in the App Store rankings lately. And within Tribe, you can even send a video to the CEO and he'll respond within 12 hours to you directly. So lots of fun little things that let you know that they care about their product.
Yeah, so it's important, I think, as we're thinking about these things too, is that as you continuously launch, continuously be engaged with your customers, and that will help them get through the missteps. And if you're communicating, problems and things that you're finding to your customers, they're more willing to be accepting of those types of things.
Sure, and don't be afraid to toot your own horn. Send out a newsletter, send out a push notification, create detailed software update release notes. People read those. They'll help you and your customers feel engaged.
Well, let's talk a little bit about those first testers. You're putting together an app, you're putting together a product that you want to get out there. What's the best way to find those first couple testers? I know with me, I'll go to other developers, people that I trust, as kind of a first step to get their feedback, because I know that they'll have my best interest in mind, and they'll tell me exactly what they think and not sugarcoat things. And that's really important to me. I don't want, if you go show your mom or something like that, they're going to be, oh, this is the greatest thing in the world. That feedback is not helpful, right? You need feedback that from people that you trust and you respect, that have been doing this, that can give you that feedback and tell you, like, hey, you need to stop, you need to work on this, you need to fix these couple issues. Or, they might give you some little tweaks and things that you can think about down the line. And that, for me, that's kind of a no-go type thing of getting that really initial feedback from people that I trust.
Yeah, and so I almost always go to friends and family first, just to get those glaring things that I just didn't think about, or like maybe the color is really bad or things aren't aligned properly. And generally, friends and family will let you know about that kind of stuff, like or you really missed something. Like, for example, Rob, I sent you an app that we've been working on lately, and you couldn't create an account. That seems like a pretty big oversight. Probably need to get that one fixed. So, but as a developer, when you're working on software, you test very specific scenarios, and things get overlooked. So when I send the app out to a developer, it's usually at a point where I feel like most of the nitpicky, buggy stuff is solved. Because as a developer, I know that we're going to be focusing on those types of issues. For me, developers aren't necessarily going to be like the greatest adopter of these technologies that I work on, at least, because I don't know, we're always busy, right? But I want a good demographic from my beta users. I want to send it to a friend. I want them to send it to a couple other friends. Maybe you put it out there on betalist.com. Maybe you drop it out on Product Hunt, if you're really, really brave. But the point is you want it controlled. Sometimes maybe you have a list of users, 1,000 users, 500 users, that you let them sign up and give you some feedback. But the initial group, friends and family, trusted developers, people who've done this before in the startup space, they've always got good key insight that you haven't thought about potentially. Send your app to Rob and I. We'd love to help you take a look at it. Anybody like that, send it to them. Get their feedback. Yeah. And also, don't be afraid to put your app out put on your website. Put it on beta list. Like I said, take signups from people who are potentially interested in your product for two reasons. Number one, you now have a potential acquisition list for a customer base. And number two, you've got people that you can let know what's going on with the product and who can jump in as soon as it's ready to be tested.
Yeah, I think those are some really great points. And I think, like you said, it's important to get a wide variety of beta testers because as a founder, as a leader developing a product, sometimes you can get so ingrained in a feature or, how you expect it to work that you can overlook things. So it's important to get outsider, feedback on those things.
And the great thing about outsiders too is a lot of times if you've got a friend who knows what you're working on already, they get the concept. They might even have seen screenshots and different pieces. They may even have used it on your phone before. So if you send them a piece of software or a product that they already are familiar with, their view of it's going to be a little bit different than somebody who has no idea what it is. So make sure you don't just send it to people who already know what you're doing, who are most likely going to pat you on your back. Like Rob said, send it to your mom. She's going to be like, this is beautiful. Of course she's going to say that. So make sure you get it to people who don't know what the product is, but might be closely related to you that you can get some honest feedback from. It'll be very helpful.
I think one thing maybe a lot of people don't launch because they're worried about the negative feedback,
perception,
the haters, the naysayers. What are people going to say about their products? And so maybe they don't launch or they keep delaying. So, let's talk a little bit about that and, how you develop that thick skin to not take those criticisms personally. I mean, I guess that's one thing that I do is I think about it as this person's not criticizing me personally. They're actually helping me by providing this feedback, even if it is negative, so that I can fix the problem.
Yeah. Look, everybody's Mike Tyson on the internet, right? Everybody's a troll. They're going to say things that they wouldn't normally say. It's probably not going to be very nice if it's a negative review, but there's also constructive criticism in there. I mean, sometimes you'll get a 1 or 2 star app review, and it actually tells you something very telling about your product. Not all of them are going to be like, this app sucks, man. So look at those comments that they're making. It gives you the opportunity to add new tasks and maybe pivot on an idea and make a change. Developing the thick skin, it's like you said, you just have to disconnect from it being personal. And as a founder, CEO, it is hard to not take that personally, but you got to remember it's the product. It's not them telling you that your nose is big.
They might say that too. Who knows?
Yeah, well, I have a big nose, so I'm used to that one.
Well, I think that people now with so many forms of communication, people are communicating with companies in so many different ways that they forget that some of these companies some of these products aren't developed by huge companies. They're developed by a single individual or a small team, yet they treat it like a huge company. I remember when I first started developing apps on Android, I was selling an app for $1, and people would get, a few people didn't like it, and they wanted their 99 cents back. It was crazy. They give you this $1. They expect so much from just $1. And so I thought that was interesting that when people are parting with their money, there's really that expectation there that, this is some huge company, you should get this right. You should fix these bugs. So I thought that was interesting.
And sometimes they're based on real things. But I had a review on an app this week of some code that I inherited, and basically you could tell that the person didn't know what they were doing. They're like, I can't even log into this app, and I went and looked at the log history of what they were doing, and they weren't even doing what they were supposed to. They had an empty username. Of course you can't log in, but we can't fix every problem like that. We can't handhold every user. So, but you still look at it and go, okay, what can I do to prevent this? So now I'm going to put a label there that says your username is required. You learn a little bit from all the feedback, positive and negative, and don't take it offensively. Maybe the best way to beat a troll is to be a troll yourself. Trolls have thick skin, so just develop thick skin and start deflecting those name callings.
Is that what you do? Control all my products?
Yes, I'm a troll.
I guess the point is that really think about the feedback that you're getting, both positive and negative, and really use that to help make your product better. Not delaying the launch, right? But just trying to make your product continuously better each time. and even if there's little things you can do to improve it over time.
Absolutely. And the closed captioning on what Rob just said was become a troll.
Yeah. So I hope this episode has helped you to think about product perfection in a different light and really focus on getting your product out there, setting milestones, thinking about how those releases, continuously release products to get it out in front of your customer. Really focus on defining and solving your customer's pain and how each release and each milestone does that. And then think about how you can get beta testers to use your product to help give you feedback and help continuously improve it. And then, just focus on the positive aspects and take the naysayers and help that make a better product for your company.
Absolutely. And guys, don't forget, send us an email at the email address associated with our podcast. We'd love to take a look at your products. Hit us up on social media. I'm the Scott Davis on Twitter. Rob, I don't know what you are because I can't remember anything. But you guys can reach out to us. We'd love to help you, give you some ideas, and help you make a better product.
Yeah, I'm at Rob Dickerson Jr. So you can shoot me a message there or go to Map Out Learning and send me a message there. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Stretch Goals podcast. You can access the show notes for this episode and listen to other episodes by heading over to stretchgoals.fm.